Hi everyone. Welcome to my session on office ergonomics in a crazy, crazy world. I say office ergonomics as this is just what will make sense and give you an idea of what we're going to look at today. But in reality, that currently means your bed, your shed, your sofa, or a slice of your dining room table. And it's the same for all of us, me included. Look, this is my dining room, as you can see. So if we say that wherever you plonk your laptop at the moment is as officey as it gets right now, then it's the ergonomics of that we're going to look at today. And I also wanted to say, please don't think this is going to be some slick PowerPoint presentation. There's a perfectionist part of me that would love to be able to do that. But there's the real live flawed me that knows deep down that just isn't my style. And if we then throw on top the fact that like most people, I'm still learning the tech that goes with this new world, then I have to be honest and say that whilst I probably could, if I tried really hard, put that slick presentation together for you, it'd take me weeks to do. And those of you that know me well would be sat there thinking, who is this strange woman? That's not the Jill that we know. So as I say, not slick, but hopefully informative, raw and real. So let me demonstrate that raw reality now by attempting to share my screen with you. Here we go. There we go. Hopefully that's it. So here we have it, Agile Remote Working Safety, a pragmatic approach for a crazy world. This isn't a remote working risk assessment training course, important to say. There's nowhere near enough time available to us to cover all of that. What it is, though, is an outline of a pragmatic approach to what you need to do to not only fulfill your obligations as an employer, but also to keep your employees safe, comfortable, happy and productive in this mad and changing world. I don't believe in overcomplicating things, I really don't. So what I'm going to do is answer your most asked questions and hopefully get you to take at least this aspect of the current world changes off of your worry list so that you can concentrate your sleepless nights focusing elsewhere. We've all got plenty of reasons for sleepless nights, I think, at the moment, so I'm sure you don't need another one. So just to introduce myself, my name's Jill Farmer. I'm a registered osteopath and chartered ergonomist. This is me back in the olden days when we could have haircuts, and it's all gone a bit wrong now, but never mind. We're all in the same boat. I started out as a therapy radiographer back in the 1980s, a long, long time ago. I never worked a day as a radiographer. I finished my training, then went traveling for 2 years and did all sorts of jobs, including packing Play-Doh on a production line and cooking on a prawn trawler in the Gulf of Carpentaria in Australia, which was interesting, as I'm sure you can imagine. When I finally came home, I did all sorts of mainly office jobs before finally training to be an osteopath 20 years ago now, and purely by chance falling into the world of ergonomics in 1995, and I've really never looked back. Probably would be pretty arrogant to say that I'm a born ergonomist, so I'm not going to lay claim to that one. But although it took me quite a long time and a lot of jobs to find my work home, if you like, I really do feel like I've found it. It's a job that I love. I'm very proud to achieve chartered status earlier this year. Very proud of that. I'm also a co-founder of Flex, a startup facilitating more of us to both live and work locally. And of course, working alongside my business partner, Caroline Sumners, to bring you Workarama today, which is very exciting. So whenever I say I'm an ergonomist, people always say, you're a what? Most people sort of know what ergonomics is, but ergonomist, that always stumps them. So what is an ergonomist? Well, I could give you some official definition, and there's lots of pretty looking models out there with circles and arrows and Venn diagrams and all that academic-y looking stuff. But to me, it's someone that looks at the interaction between us crazy bunch of human beings and the environments we find ourselves in. And whilst most people think of this as our physical environment, it's actually much more than that. We don't just look at making those interactions work for the physical you, but also the psychological and social you. So all that mush that's going on up here. And it gets even more complicated when you think that all of those aspects of you and your environment interact and intermingle into a complex, jumbly mess that interacts in turn with everybody else's jumbly mess. In a complex and messy world, to create one hell of a tangle that we try and unravel and pick and find ways to make stuff better. And that comes as a surprise to many people who think we just specialise in adjusting chairs. And of course I am a chair geek, I am. My area of specialism is office, agile and remote working, and has been since I started this back in 1995. But like most ergonomists, I'm a constant observer of the world in general and always looking at ways to make things better in all aspects of our working lives. In fact, my colleague is always laughing at me because apparently I think everything is ergonomics. Well, let me tell you, that's because it is. And speaking of said colleague, here she is. If I can just take a moment to say a big thank you to Caroline Sumners, as she has undoubtedly done the lion's share of the work behind the scenes today for Workarama. She isn't doing a presentation, I don't think, so her contribution will go unnoticed if we're not careful. So here's a very, very big thank you and job well done from me. And all the other speakers today, we really do appreciate it. And I think I'm probably buying the socially distant wine later. So thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. So back to the subject of office ergonomics. For the purposes of this today, office really just means anywhere you happen to be doing officey sort of jobs. And in a normal world, I'd say that's pretty much anywhere these days. We now have the tech to be able to work wherever and whenever we please, allowing us to build in workplace agility. Some of you are already agile in some ways. So agile working, activity-based working, martini working, whatever you want to call it. Actually, you have to be of a certain age to understand martini working. But whatever you want to call it, it all amounts to pretty much the same thing. And that's not being tied to a central city office location Monday to Friday, 9 to 5, and having some level of flexibility in the way we work. But that all went a bit pear-shaped a couple of months ago, didn't it, with COVID-19 and office ergonomics, I can't even say the word myself, now pretty much means home working ergonomics, for now at least. And I know that many of you are working hard to make your offices safe for people to return, but many of you are also starting to realise that our offices may never be used in quite the same way again. I think whether we like it or not, the genie is well and truly out of the bottle. So flexibility, individuality, freedom, choice in how, where and when we work. We've all had a taste of that freedom, and there's no way that genie is going back, not completely anyway. And that's not to say that some won't be chomping at the bit to get back to the office every day and resume the life that they had. Of course, some will, but many won't want to do that, at least not every day. But I think it would be naive and wrong to think that our only two options are office or home. Because over the coming weeks and months, our offices and co-working spaces will hopefully start to be opened up again. And hopefully with a bit, when we're a bit further down the line, so will all the other spaces that we could potentially work in. They're a bit closer to home. So coffee shops, pubs, libraries, and all those other spaces that are often underutilised throughout the working day. And whilst using these spaces as an alternative to the traditional office has started to be explored by some forward-thinking employers, it's still very much the exception rather than the rule. But I really do think that is going to change. And I think it'll change not just because the genie is out of the bottle and employees will demand it. Employers are starting to see the benefits too. I've spoken to many business owners and senior managers over the past weeks who've admitted that they have seen the value in remote working for themselves as well. And they don't intend to go back to how it was before either. So no grotty commute, more time in their day, less risk in terms of disaster recovery and business continuity. Or for any business with serious sustainability credentials, the planet has clearly benefited in the last few weeks as well. So the question is, what has this really got to do with ergonomics, Jill? Well, lots, actually. What I'm keen to get across really is that this is a permanent change. Some will inevitably be more flexible, agile, and remote than others, but overall, as businesses, I think we need to assume that permanent agility is the new normal in the world of office ergonomics, and we need to start hacking a plan with this in mind. So, with permanent office agility in mind, I think I need a better term for it than that. So answers on a postcard, please. Permanent office agility, that's not going to work, is it? But hopefully it describes for now what the future will look like. And thinking about many of the queries I'm getting from clients around how the hell they're going to deal with displacement equipment regulations and make them relevant to how we're working today. If I look back at all the questions I've been asked over the last few weeks, they basically add up to 3 burning questions. And that is, do we need to risk assess? If so, how do we do it? And finally, but probably the most vexing question of all, what do we need to provide? So let's look at that through the lens of permanent office agility. So not just home or office, but wherever you happen to be. So burning question number 1, do we need to risk assess? The very short answer, I believe, is yes, and this is why. So I know that many of you have been keeping an eye on the HSE website to see what they've got to say on this, and I've left it as late as possible to put this bit together to make sure it's up to date. And I'm sort of laughing at myself when I say that, because although I'm sat here alone, I can clearly hear my colleagues literally guffawing at this with comments like, you're right, we believe you, of course that's why you left it so late. Nothing to do with the fact that I'm a complete last minute Annie, and yeah, fair cop gov. But anyway, lucky for you that I am a complete last minute Annie, so this should be up to date. And I know that many of you are more confused after looking at the HSE site than you were before, and I can understand that, I really can. Much of health and safety information and regulations are, I think, purposely open to interpretation, and whilst many do complain that it really doesn't help them, I think in reality the opposite is true. The world is messy and complex, and we need that waffliness, that's a technical term by the way, waffliness, and that wriggle room really, to be able to adapt how we look after our employees in a way that suits them, the way that they work, and the organisation that they work for. So overall, I think it's a good thing, but it does require that we need to take the time to think stuff through and make sure that we're comfortable with our own interpretation of what they're telling us. So the definitive answers that I know many of you seek just aren't possible, unfortunately. And I put the word pragmatic in the title of this presentation because I think that the world of safety needs straightforward, real-world pragmatism at the best times, and probably now more than ever. So although they have until recently, this is the HSE by the way, been saying that as an employee you shouldn't expect a DOC assessment at home, what they're saying right now, it has changed a little, is that you should do a risk assessment, maybe. They do confuse the matter, I have to say, by using the terms temporary, permanent and long-term without any definition of what these actually mean. At the same time, they do make it quite clear that if someone is a long-term or permanent home worker, then they should be risk assessed. And even if someone is a temporary home worker, then the employer has the same responsibilities as any other worker, and control measures need to be put in place to protect them. Okay, need to go and have a little bit of a lie down now. I mean, really, what does all of that mean? Well, what I think it means is that the only thing you need to consider is whether your employees are temporary or permanent home workers. So if you think they're permanent, and I think for most of us these changes are going to be permanent to a greater or lesser degree, then it's quite clear you do need to risk assess. If you think it's temporary, then the picture is more confusing about whether you have to risk assess, but you do have to put control measures in place even if they're temporary. And I'm not sure how you would do that without first doing a risk assessment. Clear as mud, eh? So although my advice has been so far to not go overboard, and most people will be fine for a short period of time, just email them and invite them to let you know if uncomfortable. I think after 2.5 months of home working, with many of you not going back completely for the foreseeable at least, now is the time to assess. So, burning question number 1, do we need to risk assess? Yes, I think you do. Which leads us on to burning question number 2. How do we do it? So again, if you want a short answer, that would be train your employees to carry out dynamic risk assessments. Simple. So this is where it's important to think about what work might look like in a few months, or even as little as a few weeks if all goes well. Employees might be coming back into the office a bit, still working from home a bit. Coffee shops and restaurants have opened up a bit. We're all starting to build a bit of variety into our working day, just because we can. We've been cooped up for months, so why wouldn't we try and mix it up a little? If we're going to identify hazards and control risks when we're working like this, then that sort of static DSE assessment that we normally do in the office just isn't going to cut it. So we do need something a bit more adaptable. So what we're talking about here is a dynamic risk assessment. And in simple terms, this is just a risk assessment that you do on the go. As your environment changes, so does your risk assessment. So obviously when away from the office environment, employees don't have the control that they do within the office. So we're reliant on employees to be aware of the risks and take sensible precautions to minimize those risks. So what you do is you give your employees some basic training on what to look out for and a simple risk assessment checklist that they can complete in the first instance. Doesn't have to be anything fancy. And we're happy to give you hours if that would help. And then after that, they can complete this checklist whenever they have any concerns or would like some reminders. The idea is that once you know what you're looking for, and the more that you do it, it becomes pretty much second nature. And let's also not forget that health and safety is a two-way responsibility. So under health and safety regulations, both the employer and the employee have responsibilities to ensure their safety. It's not just down to you as their employer. They need to tell you if they're struggling and take the advice that you give them. In terms of who you prioritise, we'd always say that it should be people with existing difficulties such as aches, pains, eyesight problems, disabilities. The people that you probably already know that struggle at times, even with the best of setups, and probably the ones that you've already been in touch with since lockdown in reality. You obviously need to review these assessments. Many will be absolutely fine and not need any help at all. But for those that do need help, you can carry out a risk assessment over the phone or Zoom or whatever works for you, really. And I would just say here that I wouldn't be too concerned that you'll be overwhelmed with risk assessments being returned. In my experience, you're more likely to have to nag people, really you are, to complete them rather than the other way around. So I hope that's answered burning question number 2. How do we do it? The answer? Dynamic risk assessments. And just a note on what the hazards are that we're talking about here. People often assume that all we're talking about is a DSE assessment, but you do need to be looking a bit wider than that. You also need to be looking at manual handling, slips, trips and falls, personal safety, lone working, electrical safety and stress. And whilst it might not be a direct hazard for the individual, you also want to consider data security at the same time. Much of this is common sense, but your employees will need to be aware and mindful of these things as they change their ways of working. So training is important if they're going to assess these risks themselves. As I said earlier, I did an hour a little bit about putting the specifics of each of these hazards in this presentation, but it would just taken way too long. But do shout if you need some help on this. So last, but certainly not least, in terms of burning questions, burning question number 3, what do we need to provide? This is the thorniest question of them all. But this is probably my favourite slide of the whole presentation, actually, not least because it's got this lovely little chap in that's having a good old ponder. He's very, very cute, and I think, but also because it's colourful and creative, and I hope a little bit thought-provoking in a way, because to really answer this question, that's what we're all going to have to be. It's creative. It's going to be really important going forward. So I'm going to try not to turn into the HSE here and give you a waffly answer that leaves you none the wiser. But at the same time, I don't think there are any straightforward answers to this one, I'm sorry to say. Many ergonomists will tell you that the answer to many things ergonomic is it depends. And this is certainly one of those situations. But let's just have a quick look at what the HSE have got to say on this at the moment. So they say that, and I'm reading this, I'm paraphrasing it, and I have summarised it, but just to make sure I get their words right for you. They say that control measures need to be put in place for temporary and permanent home workers. That employers should try to meet employees' needs for specialist equipment, or look at other solutions that don't necessarily involve providing equipment, such as cushions rather than a chair. But when home working becomes permanent, an employer should provide appropriate equipment and advice on control measures. Got that? I think I'm just going to go and have another little lie down, because again, they don't make life easy. And I think one of the important things to point out here is that for anyone who hasn't done too much health and safety training, when they talk about control measures, that doesn't necessarily mean a physical item. A control measure is just something that reduces risk. It doesn't remove risk, that's not realistic. It just reduces it to more acceptable levels. The phrase they actually use throughout health and safety is that you should reduce risk to the lowest extent reasonably practicable. And that will be very familiar to those of you if you've done any health and safety training, really, or if you're a safety geek like me. But it will sound like a bit of a gobful if not. Sorry about that. It's just the phrase that they use. But it's effectively inviting you to use common sense in the control measures that you put in place and make your solutions appropriate to your organisation. And what's appropriate in reality to a multi-million-pound corporation with buckets of money may not be appropriate to a small family firm that's struggling a bit. So in this example, they mention a cushion, but it could also be some training or advice to take more regular breaks rather than a £500 chair necessarily. I couldn't agree more with that, to be honest. People always think that the solution is to basically just chuck money at these things. I mean, if you haven't spent money on someone, then you haven't reduced their risks, but that just isn't true. So does this help answer burning question number 3? Well, I think it does, but not in the way that I know many of you are hoping for. That definitive, cut and dry, this is what you need to provide. And I honestly think we're always going to struggle to a degree with this one. So this is where you need to be creative and work with your management teams and employees to a certain extent to determine what's appropriate for you to provide. Because what you provide ultimately depends on the organisation you work for, what the organisation does, how much money you have, how much you value employees, how you view return on investment in terms of employee satisfaction, engagement, recruitment and retention, all of these sort of wider issues. And armed with all of that background, you have to take your risk assessment and decide what level you want to pitch your control measures, your solutions. And this isn't an easy thing to do. It's what I and my colleagues do every day when faced with someone in discomfort for whatever reason. There's normally a million and one different solutions that we could recommend, all of which will probably do the job just as well. But which is the right one for the employer and their budget? And which is the one that the employee is hoping to get? And there's normally a bit of a chasm between the two. It is a complex psychological minefield, potentially, back to that jumbly mess of ergonomics that I told you about in the beginning, and one that can be very tricky to navigate. But with this in mind, I think you have a real and exciting opportunity here to really positively transform your business. Not just in how your employees are working in the weeks, months, and years to come, but how you deal with your remote working policies and packages going forward will be a real differentiator in business. In the future, I think when a new recruit is asking about your pension package and gym benefits, they're going to be wanting to know about your remote working package too. So it really is time to start getting your FMs, your health and safety, and your HR teams together and start really thinking about that one. Are you going to do a Twitter and say that everyone gets £1,000 to work remotely and hope that they don't just spend it on a week's holiday in Tenerife? Are you going to have a list of standard equipment that you'll provide and employees can decide if they want them or not? Are you going to say that everything they need is still available in the office, so that if they can't get comfy at home, then they need to come in? Or are you going to only provide equipment based on a risk assessment? The possibilities really are endless of how you handle this. But for now, I do appreciate that we need to answer burning question number 3, if we can. So, burning question number 3 really is, do we need to provide desks and chairs and footrests and all of that workstation type malarkey that we do for them now in our offices? So the answer to that question, in my opinion, is that in the short term, I think you need to treat people as individuals and not go down the one size solution fits all route. And just provide whatever your individual risk assessments tell you is required to keep someone safe and comfortable when working remotely. And how far you take that in terms of how simple or fancy your solutions are is really up to you. So, just to summarize, the future is now, it's here. Work has changed drastically over the past couple of months. It was happening anyway, and of course it would have been lovely if that had just happened, gradual transition for everyone slowly to get their head around it, but it hasn't happened that way. So 2.5 months into the pandemic, and that genie is well and truly out of the bottle, and there really is no going back. Personally, I think it's going to be great. I really do. It's going to take us time to settle into it, obviously, but overall for work is going to be a good thing. I think that the phrase work-life balance will become possibly a bit outdated. We'll just talk about life, with work being an integral part of that. And that balance, integration, flexibility will become more realistic and attainable once we stop trying to make everyone fit the same working mold. Every employer and employee will find their own way, obviously, forward in all of this. Some will flock straight back to their old ways of working, and some will fight to keep their newfound freedoms. And of course, we're all different, so it will be everything in between. To answer your burning questions, yes, it's time to risk assessment. But don't panic about how you do it. Train your employees, treat them like grown-ups, and they'll do it for you. And lastly, don't get too hung up on who gets what. It's a difficult question to answer that I think you will work out in the coming months. So yes, you need to give it some thought and make sure it's the right solution for all concerned. But just because Twitter are giving everybody £1,000 to work from home doesn't mean that you have to. But if you get your heads together and get creative, then this could be a real opportunity to use remote working as a tool to not only create better lives, and a more sustainable world, but also recruit and retain top talent and drive your business forward. So that's it, folks. Thank you for joining this session. I really do appreciate your time and hope that you're enjoying all the rest of the speakers that we've lined up for you. Do check out the Workarama podcast, where I've picked people's brains for you. So there's lots more ideas and insights there about how we deal with this crazy new world. I've also got a video on setting yourself up comfy at home that I'll put onto the platform. It's no expensive solutions, just simple stuff. Feel free to share that or put it on your intranet. And obviously, if you've got any questions or comments, then I'd be delighted to hear from you. So thanks again, and see you soon. Bye.